also, she is my teacher and a mentor for the DDM youth group for the past 3 years and counting, I believe. So I'd like to welcome, or extend a warm welcome to Chang Ji to be here at LA today. So, take it away.
Thank you very much. And I was teasing with Chang Ji that I brought the East Coast weather over here. And I'm actually Canadian, so I come from the land of igloos. I like cold. So you guys are experiencing cold, so it's comfortable for me, but it's very uncomfortable for all of you. So I would actually like to thank the director of DDMBA, Chang Master, for organizing this talk, and all the volunteers too, and Ashley for, for working on this with me too. So right now, during the first month of 2023 in California, right, we already have experienced several mass shootings in Monterey Park, right, Half Moon Bay, right, and even went up as north as Oakland, right. I'm sure there's a few more other places I might have missed, and it's actually around all over the U.S. But we've seen a lot of these mass shootings. So Chang Ji was asking me to kind of talk about this because it traumatizes a lot of people and the community. So right now, I just want to extend my heartfelt condolences to all the people, particularly also, the Asian community, because during Chinese New Year, an extraordinary, actually, paradox that happened because it's not racial, because it's an Asian man that killed Asians, that shot Asians. So this is actually something that takes the bewilderment of this kind of carnage to a level that is very hard to understand, right? So I just want to extend sympathies to all. And I want to enter this talk today in a spirit of deep empathy for the suffering that all of us are actually bearing witness to and experiencing. As the world turns with a lot of unknown forces that is actually bigger than us and could also sweep us away because we don't know what's happening. There's no precedent for some of these things that are happening. So the question is, how can we maintain our presence of being, in this maelstrom that we didn't choose? During this deep time of suffering, deep suffering for America and also the entire world. So with the onset of the pandemic, actually 3 years ago, right, so we all know it's very contagious, and it's still very contagious right now, so everyone's wearing a mask, but as I'm a student, I don't have to wear a mask. And we went through a lot of lockdowns, and there was a huge amount of loss of income as a result of this. And for Americans, though, or even Canadians, the shock of actually having to wear masks. Right? It's very uncomfortable, and also there's this meme that went out, I can't breathe, with wearing masks. And there was a lot of uncertainty because, again, there's no precedent of this kind of pandemic at this kind of scale, that it affects everyone. No one is left behind, right? Not even the rich is left behind with this. So the next one is actually climate at code red. So we've seen a lot of extreme, a lot of severe weather extremes. So very good example right now for you, I think, with nature is the consequences of climate change, is the kind of weather that you're getting this winter for California. So what have you been getting, which is very unusual in California? What did you get? What? Right, how long did you have the drought for? Like, how long was the drought? How many years? 5, maybe 5 or more years of drought, and then now you've got, right, you got hail?
Yeah, yesterday.
There was yesterday? When was the hail? In the afternoon? Oh, wow. And you got, I heard like snow, right? And you've got atmospheric rivers, one after another. So that brings so much rain, right? So is the city's storm sewers able to deal with it? So there's flooding, right? So there's a lot of destruction. Even when I was trying to get here on Thursday, my flight was canceled from the East Coast and then rescheduled, and it was a horrendous, like, a way of getting to the West Coast. And when I got to the West Coast, I was like, oh, okay. So what's causing all this cancellation? Because I landed at San Diego and it was not raining. Right, so that is what it is, and it still continues because today may be the one sunny day, and then it comes back again, right? Is it atmospheric reverse again? Until next what? Wednesday. Next Wednesday. Oh. So it's going to be hairy for me to get back to the East Coast. Okay, so all of these things are happening, and it's also sweeping right across America. And not only that, we also find this in many places around the world with all these weather extremes, because there's so much, the ocean has warmed up so much, and there's so much moisture that's created that it changed a lot of the weather patterns. So with all of this that is happening, you're seeing a lot of destruction of land and homes, and there's like a lot of loss of income because of that, and also displacing massive amounts of people. They're forced out of their homes and they became climate refugees. And you're going to see more of this actually as the planet continues to warm up. You will see a lot more of this. And so the next one is actually the invasion of Ukraine. Just a few days ago, it actually went over the 1 year mark of this war. Right? And actually this war is a symptom of mounting negativity and dissatisfaction with the status quo of the world right now. So be it maybe geopolitical realignment, or it's national upheavals, or it could be civil unrest. But it's not only that, but it's also a cost of living increase. So there's energy and food insecurities that becomes more widespread, and essential services are more strained. So yesterday, when I was heading to the airport at San Diego, I passed by like a gas station and I was looking at the price, $5.15. What is it here right now in Los Angeles? About the same? I tell you, you know how much it is in the East Coast? No, it's $3.50. I can't believe it. Like, why is the West Coast more expensive? You gotta be kidding me, $7? I mean, like at the worst of the energy crisis we had last year, I think in the East Coast we got to $5, right? But not $7. So what was it before the invasion though? How much was it, the gas prices in LA? It still is, like, it has always been like $5 and something? $3, $4, right? So that's like energy crisis, and then it caused a lot of inflation. All the price of food went up, and maybe other goods that you use also went up. So you could see that. So that brought about a lot of widespread energy and food insecurities, and prices of everything soared. It caused a lot of stress for families to, pay for their living. So the thing is, though, none of us actually saw this coming. We're having to actually learn in ways we never expected. So even though we know, actually, they're absolutely inevitable and it's predictable that you know it's coming, but when it happened, as you experience it, it's still, it's still kind of like a disruption to your normalcy. So this kind of disruption actually causes deep suffering, right? And there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of fissures in the facade of civilization, right? Around the world, you see that. And that's also, that is also the case in LA, that you saw these tragic shootings that really traumatizes the community. And what Master Sheng Yen actually had said before, in the face of deep suffering, right, and livelihood insecurities, people actually shed their civilized behavior very, very quickly. And we also witnessed the breaking down of civilization and social order. So again, a warning though, because this is an issue I'm very passionate about with climate change. If we don't change, by the end of the century, you're looking at a 4-degree global warming. At that point in time, all sense of civilization is going to disappear. Social order is going to disappear because people are fighting for survival, right? The current efforts of what member states are doing has brought this number down from 4 degrees to 3.5 degrees. Not good enough, because when you hit 3 degrees, it is the point of no return, because you will have runaway climate change. The planet itself, the ecosystem of the planet itself, will help you release more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and make it even worse. And at that time, you can't stop it anymore. So it's still not good enough. So that's just a short digression, because that's my passion. So right now, I would actually like to delve into the tip of this iceberg that we were talking about, this kind of violence, to actually examine some of the unexamined factors of this kind of violence that is happening. People don't just shoot others because they want to. It's not that they just want to, right? They've gone through a lot of things in life, probably, that they felt that they were ignored, they were not seen, right? And they were made to feel very insignificant, to the point that they're irrelevant and they're not good enough, and this could have made them lose hope. And when they lose hope, they turn this kind of suffering into villainizing all the others who seem to be better off than them, right? So when they feel they have nothing to lose, sometimes it's easy to weaponize them, is what we say, right? So it's a very scary thing for our young people, because they're growing up in a world in which it is extremely challenging. And when they lose hope, it is easy for terrorist groups to kind of recruit them, because they've got nothing to lose, right? All right, so I want to start with 2 questions that I want you to really think about. So what are these 2 questions? What should I be afraid of today? Okay, the next one is, who's to be blamed? Okay, think about it for a few seconds. What should I be afraid of today? Who's to blame? So what should scare me, and whose fault is it? Anyone would like to share? What should I be afraid of today? And who's to be blamed? Yes?
I'm not really afraid of anything. Oh, sure.
Thank you. I was on a plane one time. I travel a lot, well, used to travel a lot for work. And there was, like, you go through turbulence every once in a while. This was like serious turbulence, like massive shaking. And afterwards, we landed safely. Everything was fine. But the group I was traveling with, we were sitting there having dinner, and everyone was kind of talking about, like, what would happen if we would have died. And I, wholeheartedly shared that I have no fear of death. And they didn't believe me. So that's okay. They're more than welcome to make fun of me or not take me seriously. But when you think about fear, I think fear of death as probably the thing most people would be afraid of. But if you can get past that point and you say, who's to blame? If I had a fear of death, it would be me. But that also means that if you are in control of your fear, that if you can kind of let go of that attachment, if you can transcend that fear, you have the control to let go of it. And then whatever you're afraid of, it almost doesn't matter, because it's your fear and it's your choice to continue to connect with that fear or to release that fear. And the beautiful thing is that when you release your fears, they're gone. So then you can live in a space of no fear. And then it's also important, of course, that just because you're not afraid doesn't mean you don't suffer. But just because you suffer doesn't mean you have to be afraid.
Right. So when your friends say, when they went through this kind of turbulence, they are facing death. And were they blaming?
I mean, they were kind of, I think that they weren't in a space to really fully embrace it. So they were joking about it. So they used humor as a way to deflect the real, they weren't in a space to really start to think about the emotions that were going on. So they just deflected, in my opinion, not a judgment.
So they won't talk about it.
Yes.
Okay, good. So anyone else? What should I be afraid of today? And who's to blame? You don't have to be shy. No one's like grading you, and you're not judged for whatever you're sharing. There's one person.
The environment change, including the climate and pollution, and who should be blame everybody. If you can do
You're
our
blaming
own.
everyone for what?
You hear me?
Yeah, you're blaming everyone.
I mean, everyone has the responsibility to protect our environment. So if the continues, but it's the nature, part of it is the nature. So we can do our own part to provide our environment.
Right, so what I should be afraid of right now is the state of the environment right now, and everyone is contributing towards the demise of the environment, right? So
Yeah,
who's to blame? So you're blaming everyone for not taking action, not taking enough action.
Many will take action.
So you're saying everyone should take action, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just being very politically correct. So I said, who's to blame? Like you have to say, like, I blame my mom. I blame my school. Or I blame like something. Don't be afraid. When you're a Buddhist, as a Buddhist practitioner, you think everyone's supposed to be very soft, very kind, very compassionate. Now, if everyone is doing that, the world's going to completely disintegrate around you. Right? So if you want to have, there is also virtuous, anger. Right? And that's fine.
And the other thing afraid of the war, war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like in Thailand, we all afraid of
You gotta bring your microphone up because it's hard to hear you.
war, W-A-R.
Okay. Very good.
Now it's in Europe, Russia invade Ukraine. And now in Taiwan, we all afraid of the war. China will invade us. So and who should blame? So for Taiwan's war, I will blame China. And Muslims for Russia. Okay. Right. Share.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing virtuous outright anger. It's fine. It's really fine. And the situation, I've heard this a lot because in the NGO work that I do, I work with a lot of youth activists and ecologists, and they've got a lot of anger, right? They talk about the environment, and then they will say, what should I be afraid of? My future. I'm going to I study so hard, right, for my career, and I graduate with huge student loans, And the housing prices are so expensive. I can't even, like, I'm repaying my student loan, which is kind of almost like mortgage or something, right? And I can't even save enough for a down payment for a house. And I don't even know if I graduate, if I could find a job, right? So they're outright angry, and they go like, who's to blame? They're gonna say, oh yeah, lots of stuff to be blamed. They blame the corporations, they blame the government, they blame like the whole system. And then I would say, but you are in the system. You can't get out of the system, right? So it's very difficult. But when you're doing this though, you're actually, what they're doing is they're demonizing a lot of institutions. But the question is, are institutions alive? Are they a living being? Institutions? I'm talking about institutions, I'm talking about systems. Thank you for that emphasis. Right? So what do you think? Are they alive? You think? Yes. Do you think they're alive?
I would say yes, in the way that there's always going to be an element of fluctuation or change or potential evolution or de-evolution. Like it's not stagnant, it's not flat. So there must be some kind of living quality there. Sorry.
Well, thank you for that emphasis.
Yeah, it was on silent. I didn't think that it would do that. Sorry. But yeah, I think that there is a living quality there in that it's not lifeless. There's some potential. There's potential or energy. That's kind of collection of all the people that would make up that particular group. And as there's potential for the ideals of that group of people to shift, and there's potential for the entire organization or collective or worldwide. I mean, there's so much we could do with these systems if the value systems within the systems could point more towards saving things like the planet or ourselves versus kind of being more destructive.
Right, so the key thing here is that institutions, they're not alive actually, right? They're only alive to the extent of the people that is running the institutions, right? But the thing is, why are you giving institutions life? Why are you saying the government, right? You have to look at the people behind the government, right? If you're talking about corporations, you gotta look at the people that is running the corporations, right? Reach out to that. Don't fight against the government or fight against corporations or institutions because they're actually not alive. They're not alive in the sense that, they don't have, they're not alive is because, there's really no life. It's a structure, right, that people run. So if you want to reach out, you reach out to the people behind the system, right? Help them make changes, and then things will fall into place. So what should I be afraid of, and who's to blame? So you can think about this kind of question, and it happens very often. So I'm going to turn this question actually to put yourself in the shoes of the gunman. That, that the carnage over at Monterey Park. What do you think he was afraid of, and who was he blaming? If you put yourself in the shoes of that. It might be hard though, because we're not at that state of where he is, but then think about it though. What is he afraid of? I'm sure there was a lot of analysis that happened after, right? Okay.
The first thing that comes to mind, actually the first thing I thought of, I'm going to flip to the second thing I thought of, is that what he was afraid of was to be loved. So he was afraid to be loved. And because he didn't allow that to happen, he resented the people that were around him in his life. Because from what I understand, like he went to those dance studios, and I think he might have even met his wife there and maybe taught there as well. Like there was some deep connection there to those. It wasn't a random location. Those were people that he knew, people that he associated with. And maybe he went there looking for that kind of fulfillment of a need that he had that we could label love. But it doesn't work that way. You can't go look for these things outside of yourself. You have to allow yourself to feel them. They have to begin here first. So I was originally going to say that, what he was, the potential reasoning behind the action was, it wasn't active in aggression, and it could be seen in a number of different ways. But I think what it really comes down to, sadly, is that he was unable to love himself. So he must have been so afraid to believe that he was deserving of and to allow himself to love and forgive himself, which in turn makes it impossible to love or forgive anyone else. Then it makes it a lot easier to judge them and say that they're the problem. And then once you've created such a division, then it's easy to be aggressive and violent.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? And there's one person over there in the back. You could just come here and sit and give a talk. Because what you were saying, I was going to talk about it too.
I think
You have to bring the microphone up to your mouth.
when you said we have to put ourselves into the other shoes, it's quite true. What I observe, because from my experience, I like to search for like gun shooting, killer, and all this horrible stuff in America. And there is one thing that's interesting is when I watching on YouTube, there is a killer, and this killer killed a lot of women, like more than 20. And then in the court, everyone, the victim families, everyone are judging, are cursing this killer, and he just sit there and laughing and smiling. But suddenly, there's one grand, like the elderly, and come up and said, "I forgive you for what you did, even you killed my daughter or the granddaughter." And then the killer just crying. At that moment, he's crying. So it's made me wonder, maybe he has a feeling. It just sometimes we are suffering too much, and we are suffering for other people, like sometimes we cold because we just want to protect ourselves. So that's make a lot of people suffering, and he cannot like get out of it. And then he's afraid of rejection. So that's make him do like that. That's a lot of people like have this kind of similar situation happen.
Right. So when the grandmother says, "I forgive you," he cried because suddenly he was seen. So he cried because that was a connection. All right, so that's very good sharing. So I'm going to continue. So actually, the question that I was asking you about, I know that this is actually a very profoundly dangerous question to ask, that we actually center our lives around. If you don't even realize it, but then within yourself, unconsciously, you're always asking those two questions, right? So what am I afraid of, and who's to blame out of this process? And a lot of things actually uncovers before that. But actually what they are of is they're actually indicators of a culture of scarcity and a culture of not enough. That's why it's manifesting in this way. So when you think about it in your life, what are we supposed to be afraid of? And who's to blame, right? So whether it's in politics, or it's in economics, or maybe in social issues, so on and so forth, I guarantee you, if you turn on the news, or you read the papers, right, today, and the focus would be, here's why you should be afraid, and here's whose fault it is. The news is already, conditioning you, and it's just making it more ingrained about what it is. So actually, to me, it's actually very interesting to see that this is actually not just a cultural or a community level. It actually goes down into the family level too, right? So weekly, what does the family do? This is what you should do, right? And this is what should be happening, right? And in that process is then, why should we be fearful? And whose fault it is, right? It happens even at the family level, be it daily, weekly, monthly, or something. It could even happen like every 5 minutes, right? So this is actually what is happening, and the response mostly is always, oh, it's others, it's not my fault, right? So then you start to turn the blame to someone else, and you start judging other people in the process. And if something doesn't go well, right, then they'll go like, oh my God, right? Or oh my Buddha. I'm sorry, you're a Buddhist, right? So oh my Buddha, right? This is going to have huge implications on my goals and my objectives. Then we go into this catastrophizing mode, right? Building a mountain out of a molehill. Oh, it's the end of the world. Really, you know, if things don't go my way, it's the end of the world. And when that happens, we actually build ourselves up to be terrified. This is what we're supposed to be afraid of. So this is actually very indicative of scarcity, right? So we go on talking about this. So what is actually a scarcity culture? What does it look like? So scarcity culture is best understood with a very simple question of not enough, right? So you hear about this often everywhere, and it's also in the monologue of your own thought process. And you can fill in the blanks of this, right? So what is never good enough, never safe enough, it's not certain enough, perfect enough, relevant enough. And perhaps I think one of the most dangerous and insidious messages today is, I'm not extraordinary enough, right? So for some reason in the world that we live in today, an ordinary life is synonymous with a meaningless life. So you need to be extraordinary. You need to be very special. And being extraordinary means being very relevant. And so the top one for us actually for this scarcity culture is actually never good enough. You hear this all the time, right? Even when you were a little kid. Growing up, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. You gotta work harder, not good enough, work harder. Even if you get top grades, you get 100% not good enough, right? So, sorry parents. I mean, I grew up with my parents doing that to me all the time too, right? And then I do it to myself, and I beat myself up about it too. So it happens everywhere. So underlying all of this is actually shame, right? There's a shame which we all have, and that sense that we're not smart enough, and that we're not good enough, that we're not perfect enough, we're not loved enough, we're not promoted enough. So the key thing is we are just not enough. So that is ingrained in us all the time, so it manifests in that way, right? So let me pose another question to you. I like interactions. So don't like, be silent, be sharing. So how do you respond to your own not good enough? And who's to blame? How do you normally respond when that comes up within you? Let's hear from a few other people we haven't heard. Then I see people start like looking away. Oh, great.
Thank you. I think when you say we just don't have enough, I think it's an internal thing. You have to look at your self-image. Like in this past 3 years, I lost focus of who I really am. I don't think I can keep up with the changes outside of my environment. And I create a lot of unnecessary anxiety and all that unnecessary stuff. And that's just not helping me. And to a lot of self-development, self-management, video clips, and I realized that it's just your self-image. If you believe you have enough, the outside world will actually reflect to your inner thought and just bring you abundance.
Very true.
So I kind of believe that you should start from within. Look for the abundance within you.
So how did you try doing that? I mean, this is very good. This sharing is really good. So what steps did you take? I think it would help a lot of people too.
I believe we are all created equally, and we are a spiritual being experiencing human life. So if God created us, God must put tons of resources or abundance in our life already. So you will never lose anything. You just have to remember you can always access it. I know it sounds kind of hard, it's a big word, but that's what I learned from all these self-development, self-management classes, and I believe that once you start looking from within, you can find yourself that you are actually a very rich person.
So can you give us an example of one step that you took?
I just do a lot of high-fiving to myself every day when I get out in the mirror. Sometimes you get up, you feel like crap, you have to start the whole day again. But I look at myself, I say, Stephanie, I love you. You're just beautiful. High five. I high five myself. And I feel better. And if I do this continuously, like 30 days later, I actually feel good. I actually feel like my life is good. I mean, it doesn't reflect on the outside world immediately, but at least inside myself, I feel the happiness.
Okay. Well, let me share a few more things about what you were just saying too. It's good. It's a positive step that you are always reassuring yourself. But when you step out in the world, not even stepping out in the world, right? When you just pick up your devices and everything, look at different products and stuff, it just tells you you're not good enough.
You don't have to believe it.
Right, but everything around you is telling you you're not good enough, right? And when you go outside, there's advertisements outside that's going like, you can grow into your potential, and this is how you're going to grow into your potential, and you need to take a lot of loans so that you can pay for these courses that's going to help you grow into your potential, and then you'll be a good thing. So believe in us, and the brand is going to help you. This is the reality outside, though, right? Because there's all these messages everywhere. It's like, it is as bad as at the moment that you can't even go to sleep without your phone next to you. How many of you go to sleep with your phone right next to you or right next to your bed? Raise your hands. No shy. You don't have to be shy. I am one too. Right? So we're so dependent on that. The first thing when you wake up, you're looking at your devices instead of doing other stuff that you're supposed to do when you're waking up, after you woke up. So with all these things that are around you, so one good thing that you could take one next step is with all these negative messages that is telling you you're not good enough, that is fueling your inadequacies, is that you continue to kind of look inside. You are going to respond to this because we have been conditioned, right, to respond to this because that's a sense of belonging that we think that is needed so that you want to fulfill this impossible standard of perfection, right? So there's a lot of reminders. So you look within yourself when you feel like you're going to be swayed into that negativity. Look at your own fear. Look at your resistance to change. Right? What is that resistance? And it actually, as you're doing this is the inner purification that you're doing as you're taking, physical action in making these changes. So then it actually, they are reciprocal, that they will enforce each other.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I also believe that our five senses, you can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, but a a lot of these messages receiving from outside could be deceiving. So you should take it all in, and you should use your own conscious to filter it.
Right, so this is like the inner work that is helping you break out of this negative self-image, right? With the messages outside that is giving you a lot of negative self-image because they give you these kinds of perfection that is actually not attainable, right? So they say, buy this skin cream or this face cream, especially for women, right? And it's going to make you look like the model. And you're like 60 years old. And how old is the model? Maybe in her teens or 20s. So what? You think this is going to give you a fountain of youth and you're 60 years old and you're trying to look like a 20-year-old? Right? So then you could see this. And you could see the deception behind all of these things. And you could see that how the system is using inadequacy to manipulate you. Right? And you could choose not to do that. Right? Okay, that's very good. And so, the next question, we talked about the culture of scarcity, right? So now I'm going to talk about what is shame. Okay, so shame is really easily understood as a fear of disconnection. Right, just like what you were saying about, the gunman, and he actually felt like he's looking for connection, and he fears this kind of connection. So that's actually kind of shame, right? So that's what it is, and it is actually maybe you're asking yourself, is there something about me that if other people know it and they see this, that I won't be worthy of connection? Again, there's messages outside that tells you, oh, buy Listerine, right? What's Listerine, right? It's a mouthwash, and it's telling you a bad breath is bad because you're not going to be popular, right? And you're not going to succeed in life. So that's what it is. So if you're not worthy of connection, right? So the thing I can tell you really about it is this kind of feeling, this kind of shame that we feel is actually universal. We all feel it. And the only people who don't experience shame actually has no capacity for human empathy or connection. So that's what it is. And no one really wants to talk about it. And the less you talk about it, the more shame you actually have. The less you're willing to talk about it, the more shameful you feel because you don't want to share that vulnerability with other people, that what you're afraid of. So then there's a lot of secrecy about it. So what is underpinning this kind of shame is actually, again, scarcity. I am not good enough, which we all know that feeling, right? So I'm not thin enough, I'm not thin enough, right? And I'm not rich enough, or I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not promoted enough, all these kinds of things that goes on. And the thing is, it's actually what this shame that you feel is an excruciating vulnerability, right? And when that happens, this idea of like, in order for connection to happen, right, we have to really allow ourselves to be seen, like really seen for who we are. We're not fearful of whatever judgment that they have. So sharing that vulnerability too actually makes connection. So sometimes when I give talks, I like to try to get, the audience to interact, because if one audience share their vulnerability, like thank you very much for sharing, right? Then people suddenly feel like, oh, hey, I understand, right? That they empathize, and then, another person will start sharing their vulnerability. And then another person starts sharing this too, their fears and who they're blaming, correct? And their insufficiency, they're not good enough. And then and by the end it's like, oh hey, we all go through this together. And suddenly we're all connected through this feeling of vulnerability. So what a shame is actually an intensely painful feeling that we're unworthy of love and belonging. That's a shame, right? And it's actually the most primitive emotions, human emotions that we all feel. So and it's something that no one is comfortable talking about. So if left to its own devices, shame can really destroy lives. So Shame is actually the intensely kind of painful feeling that we're unworthy again of love and belonging, and it could lead to also various forms of abuse and addiction and discrimination and labeling, to the extent of like it could be violence. And shame can also be very deadly and lethal, and we're actually, when we're swimming in it, very, very deep, right? And the less you talk about it, the more you got it. So don't be afraid to share, because that's a vulnerability, right? And I know that, you know, when I teach about shame, I've heard people either say like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Or I've heard people say that, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I don't want to talk about it, right? And, but again, we say, the less you want to talk about it, the more you got the shame. So it needs three things to grow. The first one is secrecy, right? The next is silence. And the third is judgment. So that's shame, okay? Either you're judging others or others are judging you, right? So that's what you feel, so that's shame. So what do we do then in response to scarcity culture and shame every day is this, okay? The first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, right? Our self-protection is we armor up. Put on all these things, right? And I say, and then we say, oh, I'm going out into this world and I'm basically going to kick ass. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. Kick a asterisk, okay? So I'm not going to let anyone see who I am. So in doing so, I can protect myself against the things that hurt the most. What are these things? Judgment, criticism, fear, blame, and ridicule. So I'm just going to armor up, and I'm going to feel very, very safe. And then we rationalize, right? And then we convince ourselves that this armor is really smart, right? And we use a lot of different things to armor up, like maybe perfectionism, or it could be that we try to intellectualize everything, well, what else can we do with this armor? And also we're judging, right? I have this armor, right? So I'm going to judge everyone else before you judge me. So, but if you get really, really clear about what we're doing every morning, when we wake up and then we decide to armor up, it's actually very simple. This is what we're actually protecting, right? We're protecting ourselves from being hurt, right? For the very simple reason that no one wants to talk about hurt. No one wants to talk about shame. And no one really wants to talk about all of these things. And one of the most important things that people don't want to talk about, strangely, is actually love and belonging. It's even a topic that people don't want to talk about, right? Because it's uncomfortable. And they're actually, the sense of love and belonging is really an irreducible needs of men and women and children, right? So in the absence of love and belonging, there's always suffering, right? So that what we believe is we could, putting on this armor, we could protect our sense of being lovable, of being acceptable, of being worthy with connection. So that's what we think putting up this armor is going to protect us against. But the problem is, not the question, but the problem is, when you do that, we numb our capacity for wholeheartedness, right? The truthful thing is we can only be loved, and be loved as much as we're willing to have our hearts broken. That's the vulnerability. If you don't want your heart to be broken, you create this barrier. You build this fortress that actually closes out the world, right? But it also closes you up within this fortress. But we want to actually be willing to be open to love and belonging, and also the willingness to be brokenhearted, be it with, our partners, or maybe with our children, or maybe with our friends in the classroom, or with the people who work for us, or the people we work for. We all want to have this. And if you don't do that, if you armor up and you have this protective mechanism, what it does is to these people, it creates a lot of casualties. You don't know how, when you're armoring up, you too in this process. So I think the troublesome thing is that with this armor, it does not safeguard us from pain. No, it doesn't. It actually prevents us from accessing the things that vulnerability actually takes us to. So what does it take us to? So vulnerability is the, and this cursive is hard to read, right? That's a long font to use. So it actually is the path to love, to belonging, to joy, to intimacy, to trust, innovation, and creativity. Because you find connection and shared experiences with vulnerability. So that is a kind of authenticity, right? Being authentic so that you don't have to, like there's the saying that, if you say one lie, if you make a lie, you have to use 100 lies to protect this one lie. And if you continue this way, you can't be authentic, you'll be in a very anxious state of fearful of people for uncovering this lie. Okay, so let's examine actually shame and empathy from another angle, right? So what we're going to do is we operate at any given time from one of two kinds of mindsets, right? We call first one is inward mindset, and the other is an outward mindset. So with the inward mindset, it is focused on yourself, right? And others don't matter, like I matter. They're objects, right? And means to your ends. So in Buddhism, we call this ego-centered. And the next one is actually the outward mindset. So the outward mindset knows that others are people and their needs matter too, right? So I adjust what I do so that I could serve others at the same time. I fulfill my own needs and my own objectives, but adjusting it in a way that I could also support others to succeed. So in Buddhism, we call this the Bodhisattva path, right? You reduce the self-ego so that you could really serve others. So you can ask yourself this question then. Do people feel like they are a vehicle that I use? What does that mean? Or maybe it's an obstacle that I blame, right? So like what you were saying with the gunman, right? It's an obstacle that I blame. And maybe an irrelevance that I totally ignore. So that is actually an inward mindset. Or do people feel seen as individuals, just like one of the ladies was talking about a killer, right? As soon as the grandmother says, I forgive you, he felt seen, right? So, and then do you serve and uplift them and support them? So that is an outward mindset. And the thing is, everyone has a radar for these kinds of mindsets, right? And they will detect very quickly how you see them. Even you don't have to say it, but the way you interact with them, they will sense this what kind of mindset you're in. So they will respond accordingly. It's not because of what we're doing or what we're saying, but they're actually responding to our mindsets, which is a being. It's a quiet space. It is what we're holding, right? And hope that you could see that. And so, why is it that when we plant seeds of goodwill for good results, but then we don't get anything? Or sometimes we do something good, but we don't get what we expect in kind. The root of the problem is actually not the seeds, not what you're planting, which is actually the behavior, the action, the doing space. It is actually the toxic soil, which is the being space, your mindset. Okay? And so the inward mindset, if you're just thinking about yourself and you're just seeking ways to be wise so that you can validate your perspective, they can sense it. Right? So let me give you an example of this. Okay? Hobbit is very straightforward in his comments. And we are very appreciative of his comments, right? But Harold gives exactly the same comments. And yet, we are very, very defensive. Why? Same comments, but two very different reactions from this. Because Harold is actually treating us as objects, whereas Habit wasn't, right? So when Harold is treating us as objects, what is the meaning of objects? This means the value of people is dependent on how they bring value to me. Okay, let me repeat this again. What is objects? It is when the value of people is dependent on how they bring value to me. So what's the value then? Are you objects that I can use, right? And I go out of my way to be very nice to you, right? Oh, Chang Ji, you're so nice, and you're so kind. I like your very cheerful nature, right? And I'm just looking at you as an object here, right? So I'll be very, very nice to you. I create a very positive relationship with you, right? So, or are you objects that get in my way? So obstacles that keep me back. I'm just kidding, okay? Just using as an example. So like, for instance, like Ashley, right? Like, oh, Ashley is like, oh, she's just preventing me from doing this thing and this thing and this thing. So I'm going to villainize her. Ashley's not a very nice person. Oh, she's so possessive, right? And she's so bad. And I'll try to make sure everyone else knows about this because she's my obstacle and I want to get rid of her. I'm just kidding. Okay? You're a nice person. Okay? So, and then I will, so there is another one is, are you objects that I just don't care about? Right? And so if I don't care about, then I don't care about the effects of my action on you. Right? So then sometimes we would say, oh, it's very convenient for me to, get a bottle of water from, the supermarket, plastic bottle. I don't care about, the impacts of the plastic bottle on the environment and stuff because someone was actually talking about the environment and how everyone is doing it because they're just treating everyone else that is going to be affected by this pollution as irrelevant. So they don't care about what their actions are going to do. So my question is then, if you are the subject of how I objectify you, how would you feel? Right? How would you feel when people do that? You can sense that, right? Yeah? Can you sense that? Sometimes people objectify you. Just like, when we look at the what we do with everything around us, with nature, again, going back to that question. So with nature, with pollution, with people, social issues, and spiritual issues, oh, I don't care. Right? I don't really care what happens to them, or so I just continue business as usual. Right? So how would you respond to this kind of provocation? Because we commodify everything, basically. That's what it is. When you commodify everything, then everything is based on, like, I would look at everyone and go, like, benefit me, or a hindrance to me, or irrelevant to me. Right? So how would you respond to this kind of provocation? So ask yourself, because we will respond to that. That's why between the comments, the same comments that Howard made versus what Harold said, same comments but different reactions. So that is what it is. Now I want to go into this a little bit more, right? So what does an inward mindset actually invite in the others? So an inward mindset actually invites the same in others. So when you're inward, so when you're like evaluating everyone, what happens to the other person? You're inviting them to do the same thing to you. Right? And how do we do that? So when we interact with someone who is operating with an inward mindset, we feel that they are failing to consider our views or our opinions. That could happen with the killers. That could happen with people who engage in a very extreme violence, right? Because they feel like the other people are not considering their views or their opinions. And then we could take it as them, those killers, right? Could take it as an invitation to take offense. I'm offended, right? Because you objectified me. So I am going to do what? I'm going to blame you, right? So I'm going to villainize you. And I'm going to turn inward. Because when you do that, then you're treating the other people who are failing to consider your views and your opinions as objects, right? So what kind of objects? People who are a hindrance to me. So they're going to do exactly the same thing. How do you do it? You create a lot of prejudices that fixates on maybe race, on religion. It could be sexual orientation. It could be gender. It could be age, class, or maybe disability, and a whole range of other dehumanizing labels that we create to justify why we're mistreating other people. Then deep inside, you know you shouldn't. Or you're justifying yourself, you're intellectualizing this kind of action, the armor up, right? So such kind of struggles could last for maybe a minute sometimes, maybe for a day, a week, or a month. Sadly though, it could be for a lifetime, or it could happen over centuries. Like over centuries, a good example of this between two countries. Do you know which countries? Which two countries have been fighting for centuries? Or decades? I think someone talked about Taiwan, China, right? And there's also Israel and Palestine. I mean, they fought so much to the point that they don't even know why they are fighting in the first place. They're just fighting because, you know what, they're villainizing each other in exactly that same way. So they are in that inward mindset that is inviting the other person to continue to do the same thing. Okay, so now, what does an outward mindset then invite in others? So we're going to shift for that. So it's actually a matter of becoming alive to the needs of others so that we can adjust our efforts to be more helpful. So I love that example about the grandma, right, that says, I forgive you, because suddenly a person is seen as a human being with his own struggles, right? And so the only way also to mature into our potential as a human family, right, is to finally see each other, not ignore each other, but see each other. And when we see, then we can see the interconnection and also the interdependence. So when you're listening, right, when you're listening with your ears, you could, you know, sometimes talk to each other, sometimes talk past each other. So there's two things that could happen, right? There's the potential for offense taking, right? But there's also another potential for powerful possibilities to spark deep and lasting change in our communities, in our organizations, because we're connecting, right? So what would listening and learning in this way make possible right now? And so you can ask yourself that question. So what we're going to say is connection. When you have an outward mindset, you're actually looking at connection. So connection is the energy that is created between people when they felt seen, heard, and valued, and loved, right? So when they can give and receive without judgment. Inward mindset is full of judgments, right? But outward mindset is there's no judgment, right? So you're seen and heard with no prejudices. And how does this unfold? And I'm going to talk about this judgment thing, right? So what we're doing with an inward mindset, there's this dynamics though. So when you have an inward mindset, you actually invite the other person to be inward too. And I want to share an example of this kind of dynamics. And this is actually, this dynamics is called collusion. Okay, so in inward mindsets is actually what we call hearts at war, right? Just a tiny little touch or a look is enough to cause war. So hearts at war or inward mindset, we collude with each other and we call out actually the worst in each other. So our minds are so busy with our self-centered justifications about others because we need to prove our perspectives and our labels of the other person as correct. And we're busy doing that so that in the end, the gap between the two sides will widen to a point of no return. So let me share with you a very simple example of this collusion between two people. Okay, so they're lovers. So the first person is Mr. Blue, right? And this is what he did. Mr. Blue returned home late, so he's working overtime, so he's returning home late. And so what happens is his partner is called Miss White, right? And this is what she sees when Mr. Blue returns late. He's a workaholic. He just wants to spend more time in the work, and he's not like, he doesn't want to come home. He doesn't love me because he just doesn't want to come home and spend time with me. He rather spends his time at work. So these are the labels she's starting to put on Mr. Blue. And this is what she did because this is how she's labeling him. She would badger him. So, Mr. Blue, where did you go? What are you doing? Right? And then she will criticize. Why aren't your colleagues or your team working with you on this? And why are you working on this alone? Why is your boss allowing you to work overtime? She would do this and she would criticize because why? she's got the label, right, of him as a workaholic and don't love me. Now, when she is doing this badgering and criticizing Mr. Blue, this is how Mr. Blue is going to label Miss White. So again, inward mindset. So she has an inward mindset, and she's inviting Mr. Blue to go into his inward mindset. So when he sees her doing this, this is what he's going to see Miss White as. Oh my God, she is. Oh my Buddha, she is so possessive, right? She's so suspicious. Why is she calling me and asking me, like, every hour what I'm doing? Right? And she's so meddlesome. Like, what right have you got to come in and criticize about my team, right? And my boss and my workplace? So when he is slapping all these kinds of prejudices and this kind of labels on her, this is what he's going to do. So what happened is he returned home late. He worked overtime like once a week. So now he's slapping these labels on. I'm going to go work overtime like 4 times a week. So just to, because you're just so possessive, you're so meddlesome, I'm going to spend more time at work, right? So he's going to return home 4 times a week. And when he returns home, this is how he's going to interact with her when she interacts with him. He's going to be very cold. What do you want? Don't disturb me. I don't want to talk to you. I'm just going to go to my bedroom right away, right? And he's going to be very dismissive. She goes like, how's your day? Mind your own business. I don't need to tell you how my work is, right? This is how he is going to behave because of the labels that he had of her, right? And he's trying to prove it right. So when that happens, this is what Miss White is going to see. And she's going to say, oh my God, see? It's proving. He's coming back coming home late 4 times a week, and it proves my label. He's a workaholic. Right? And he doesn't love me because he still wants to spend even more time at work rather than coming home and spending the evenings with me. And sometimes, to the extent that he's working during the weekends, right? So, and then now he's treating me like very dismissive, and he's very cold to me, right? So, does not respect me. She added one more label, right? So when she sees this, and she goes like, okay, so I'm going to prove my perspective correct, so I'm going to behave this way, I'm going to continue. She's so upset now, right? I'm going to continue to badger him some more, and I'm going to criticize him some more because I need his behavior. I'm triggering him to behave in ways that prove her labels. Workaholic, don't love me, right? Don't respect me. So she's going to trigger him some more. So she's going to pester him. She's adding more stuff, escalating that relationship. So that happens. Then Mr. Blue is just going to continue to see her as, oh, look at her behavior. It's proving that she's possessive, and that she's suspicious and she's meddlesome. And this vicious cycle goes on and on and on. And it escalates to the point where they broke up because they can't stand each other. So it was a very simple thing as Mr. Blue came back late one night a week. And how did that escalate into we can't stand each other? Right? So this is called an inward mindset and how it invites the other person to be in this, and this is called collusion. Because they all have their labels. Mr. Blue and Miss White are creating all these labels that they're triggering the other person to behave in that way so that it proves that their labels are right, their perspectives are right. Okay, so this is very interesting. Does this sound familiar? I hear, laughter and awkwardness and stuff. Yeah, right? So observe this next time. Don't be in this inward mindset because it will trigger the other person to collude with you, and all these labels, Yao Qian, is going to be slapped on, right? And a lot of violence happens that way. So in that sense, when you think about the gunmen over at Monterey Park, right here that happened. How far is Monterey Park from here?
10 minutes.
20 minutes? Oh, that's close. Okay, so you can imagine for the gunman, whatever that he went through could be something similar to this too, right? Where this is how he feels he's not loved, not deserving of love, or whatever that he was going through, and he has slapped on a lot of labels on the other people. And when he does that, he encouraged other people to behave in the same way, right? To the point where, unfortunately, violence happened, carnage happened. Now let's look at how to shift to an outward mindset instead, okay? So the first thing you do when you shift towards an outward mindset is you see others, right? You don't see others as objects, but you really, really see others, right? You adjust your efforts so that you can care about them, right? And that you support them. And the third one is you measure impact. This means there is a feedback loop with the other person so that both sides develop this kind of care. Let's look at this in detail, okay? So step one, we said, see others. So the first step is when we see others as human beings who matter, just as we do, right? And how do we do that? We do this by getting curious about the other person, their needs, their challenges, their objectives, and their headaches. How do you really care about other people or be curious about the other people? Is when you sit down, you ask them, so how are you doing? Right? And you really listen to them. You don't listen to respond. You listen to understand. You listen to care. So they felt that they're really being seen. Right? So then we would ask questions, right? And then we would truly try to listen to understand what it is like to be in their role. We might even ask questions like maybe in a workplace, right? So how we have made it harder for them to accomplish their goals. Sometimes our own behaviors, unknowingly, right, could have been an obstacle for them that made it challenging. So they may become a little bit, the relationship could become a little strained. So you ask them, like, maybe what did I do on my part, right, that might cause you difficulties. This means you have to put down your self-ego to genuinely care about the others because they matter like I do. Right? And you put yourself in their shoes. So this is the beginning steps of developing empathy. Okay, so you see others to develop empathy. And the next step is you adjust your efforts. Right? So you adjust how you do things. You gather information from step one, and then we analyze our own efforts, right? How might we have gotten in their way? So how can we adjust our efforts, to be more helpful to them while we're doing our own work? And then we adjust. Okay? So the third step is we then measure impact. So we tell the other person, this is how we have made adjustments, and is our effort really helpful to them to achieve their goals? Right? So this is in a way that helps them feel like they're validated, right? That they're heard, and that what they're trying to do is important too. So I'm adjusting, and I would like to have some feedback from you. They go like, oh, this is great. Oh, you don't have to do it like this much. So, and then you adjust again, right? As you communicate with people. So you repeat this entire process again. And this is actually how you practice an outward mindset. Now, the thing is though, when you're doing this, we are human beings, right? But however, we're more human doings. We jump into action right away instead of the beings. See, the thing is, human beings is there's something that has to happen inside first. But then we don't let something happen inside first. We jump into doing right away. So when you jump into doing right away, it's not sustainable because it's a behavioral change. Right? You need to have something transform inside, just like what you were saying too. Okay, so how do we make this kind of change sustainable? I'm going to use Buddhism. I'm going to pose two questions then. How do you make it sustainable? So the first question is, what do we need to be, okay, to transform? Don't jump into action right away. Ask yourself this question, what do we need to be, right, to transform? So what do I need to be? Maybe to thrive, maybe to survive, or maybe to even heal, right? To develop this outward mindset, to care, right? What do I need to be? Ask yourself this question. And the next question is, then that's the action, right? So what do I need to do? Right? How do I meet this moment that is calling me for me to act? Right? And the third one, which is very important, is how do I marry these two together? Okay? So we can actually see this answer in the Dhammapada. Okay, so create no evil, cultivate all good, purify the mind. These are the teachings of the Buddha. And the first two, create no evil and cultivate all good, are actually behavioral. Behavioral changes, when you engage in these, they're good. Right? You're doing something wholesome. But you have to know, they're just behavioral changes. You still have suffering, and you're not on the path of renunciation. There's still something happening inside that is not changing, right? And you're you're engaging in wholesome acts. But again, you're not walking on the Bodhisattva path. The ego is still there, right? So, then what does the Buddha say? The third one is to purify the inner self, the being, right? So while you're engaging in create no evil, cultivate all good, you also need to turn that inwards to see your mindset, which is actually the source of your behaviors. Okay, and purifying through adjusting your mindset. So you can see the unexamined assumptions that you have, the perceptions that you have that were causing the kind of unwholesome behaviors. So you see that and you make those adjustments, right? So as you're doing that all the time, so what happens is that as you're adjusting your mindsets, every cell of your being at that point in time will be overflowing with bodhicitta, which is wisdom and compassion. And when it overflows with bodhicitta, it naturally radiates out, right, through your behaviors and your action, all right? And this cycle actually continues as you go on the journey of what we say here, purification of your inner self, while benefiting sentient beings through your action and behavior. So that is that connection, and you're marrying the two together. So in other words, what we're saying is that the pathway of transformation, or really sustainable transformation, is that the more we work collaboratively to maybe save our community or to save the world, we can actually save ourselves. Because with the behavioral change, you have inner purification because you have reflection inside to see the source of your unwholesome behaviors, this unexamined stuff that is happening, unseen things that are happening so that you could purify yourself. As you're doing this then, so you have to understand, so what I'm saying is the caveat is, okay, when you're benefiting the world, you're benefiting yourself. The caveat is that the liberation that we want to generate out in our community, or maybe to the world, has to be married with the liberation that is needed internally, simultaneously. It has to happen at the same time. Okay, who do we need to be in the world? Which is the purification of the self, right? While doing what we need to do, in the world. So the wisdom and the compassion from our own purification that permeates our actions in the world. You cannot have one or the other, right? It's not either or, right? You need to have both happening at the same time so that it's both ends. So when you're trying to work through, your self-image issues, inner, outer has to happen at the same time. Then it gets stronger and stronger, and you will not be as influenced by the external environment. So everything that I've talked about so far, especially with this too, is actually DDM's motto. I think some of you will know, to uplift. To uplift what? Right, the character of humankind, and to do what? Right, and to build a pure land on earth. Right, so you could see, uplift the character of humankind is purification of your mind. Right, so that is what it is. And to build a pure land on earth is that as you purify yourself, that purification permeates your cells and radiates out in your action. So that's pure land on earth. So it's not like, you gotta do this collectively. Individually, you're still doing it. Okay? And also, this is actually create no evil, cultivate all good, purify the mind. We're a Buddhist community. This is the teachings of the Buddha. Doesn't sound too difficult, right? Yeah? Good. All right. And so they are actually marrying it together. So, now let me just end this by saying, take a risk, okay? Put your true self out there. Be authentic. Be vulnerable. So empathy is actually the best reminder that we're not alone. Because when someone shares with you their vulnerability, you could maybe even understand, like, I think I went through something similar too, right? So this is how I kind of work through my fears. And then the other person will feel like, wow, you went through that too? Oh, that's a good way of what you're doing, but this is how I was doing it too. So we learn from each other. So that connection is how it's happening. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Empathy is the best reminder we are not alone, right? Rather than judgment, which actually exacerbates shame, right? Oh, you're stupid. You shouldn't be doing it this way. That actually exacerbates shame in the other person, which invites the inward mindset, right? Empathy actually conveys a very simple acknowledgement. You are not alone. I've been there. Okay? So empathy is actually a connection. It's a ladder out of this shame hole. Not only did they help maybe me climb out of it by listening and loving, by listening and loving me, they also made themselves vulnerable by sharing that they too have spent some time in that same hole. Okay? So vulnerability is not only unavoidable, but it's a prerequisite for leading a full life. It's authenticity. It's not building up that, as we can see here with the shame and judgment, it's not locking yourself away from the world. It's not locking the world out, right? So it's a full life. You move through the world. If we move through the world with the guard up, with our armor on, then we'll never feel that we belong. So just like you were saying with the gunman, right? Because he will never feel that he belongs. It's because he has his guard up. And what is his guard? I want yourself to be loved. Okay? So when you can lean into this discomfort of ambiguity and uncertainty, we actually can become more resilient than we know, right? What we're afraid of, who's to blame, right? So this is basically saying this unknown, that I'm not sure what is happening, and you create a lot of fear. So that when you can accept that and you can lean into it, you become more resilient than you ever expect you could. There will be a lot more traumas in our lives, more than what we would anticipate. There will be more. But if you can embrace that, you actually become more resilient. So for anyone that you encounter, even for yourself too, if you feel destabilized by fear, then I would caution you against lashing out, because that's the collusion circle, the cycle that you've seen, right? Don't lash out, because we tend to be our worst selves when we're afraid. Okay? So remember I asked you the two questions in the beginning? What are you afraid of? Who's to blame? So that is happening when you're lashing out. So we have to be intentional, right? We have the choice. We have to be intentional about choosing kindness and generosity, and also forming this mutually empathetic relationships with others so that we can reach out to others. So when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, right, and when we reach out for support, we're not afraid because we don't have this armor, so we would reach out for support, we will receive empathy, right, and that is incompatible. Empathy is incompatible with shame and judgment. They're just not. So when you speak up about it, it's no longer there. The shame and the judgment is no longer there when you're being empathized. We recognize that our most isolating experiences are also the most universal when you speak up, right? So shame cannot exist as soon as you speak up about it. And we recognize that we're not defective or alone in our experiences. So thank you very much. I guess right now is maybe a short Q&A. Any comments? Okay.
Hi. Great talk. Thank you. I have a question about these last points. So I personally feel like I am pretty good about being vulnerable and opening up and empathy, compassion, all those qualities. But I do find that there are some people in my life who more it's like, you know, I'm holding up a healthy boundary because I understand that this person, their capacity, right, to like also share like empathy and stuff, you know, support me in my vulnerability is like limited, you know. So, and I like value who they are in my lives, and I feel like they're doing the best they can, and so I feel like I'm just meeting them where they are at.
So what you're saying is actually, it's a very good question to say too, is because, you know, if you're trying to practice this outward mindset, right, you see them as a human being with their needs and and their fears and their challenges and their everything. So you have to really see them without judgment, right? So even if they have the inward mindset where they may be objectifying you to a certain degree, it's fine. You still maintain your outward mindset, but you will see there's a strong draw. When the person is with an inward mindset, there's a strong draw that it can trigger you to go into your inward mindset.
Right.
So when you say like creating boundaries and stuff, when we say vulnerability, it doesn't mean like completely open in that way. Excuse me. So when we say vulnerability is like, you know, at certain situations, you share your pain or maybe your challenges with them. They may or may not understand. But you don't, because of that, start judging them, labeling them. And what you share depends on the situation too. It's not like, you know, I'm going to share everything with you all the time. If that situation calls for you to share a certain amount of, like, I feel hurt when you say this, or what you're doing here is not really helping this group effort. Excuse me, because I'm just recovering from bronchitis, so I still have this cough. But don't draw this boundary though, because when you're drawing a boundary though, then you will realize that you're actually creating what we would say armoring up, right? So when you're armoring up, you're turning inwards. What you could do when you're doing that is that you go turn inside yourself and ask yourself this question then, what am I fearing? What is my fear? What is my resistance? So that you can uncover that and you can try to transcend that. So it could be like, oh, I just want to, I'm fearful of this person judging me if I share my vulnerability, right? If I share too much, then maybe it's just dangerous, it's just not safe for me. And then you'll see this resistance to change, right? And then I'm not going to be popular or something, right? And then you see this resistance to change, and then you try to make smaller changes, right? So what if I share a little bit more about, instead of sharing it this way, maybe there's another way to share this so that the person might get it, because all roads lead to Rome, right? So it's not just one approach. So you'll find a lot of other approaches, and it helps to develop your resilience, right, and your versatility in that way, because then maybe I'm not hearing something from that person. Maybe there's something else that is preventing me from really being there for that person, right? And the key thing for actually the outward mindset to really work is you don't wait to fix the problem. See, when you're fixing the problem, it's already something that erupted, right? And then you have to use kind of like maybe strong corrective measures. And the mindset is very different when you're trying to fix a problem, because when you're fixing a problem, this means what? Something is wrong. So when something is wrong, when you have to make something wrong, and there's a right, then it becomes dualistic, right? And it's polarizing. Look, if you're doing it at that level, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to solve. There's another way of doing this, that's why we say making things go right, is you start with actually the base, which is creating that kind of relationship. First by just caring, right? It doesn't matter if it's just on a project or anything, but on a daily basis, you just care. You're building a relationship that is based on caring, right? So then there's trust. When there's trust, then there are people are willing to listen to each other and learn from each other. That's the next step, right? So when people are willing to listen and learn from each other, then the next step is then they're willing to explore things together and they're willing to teach each other. Right? So when you're able to do that, then in the end, you can fix the problem. Because the underlying relationship and everything is already built there. So that's what we call helping things go right. You gotta do those things first. Right? Just do it in stages. I hope that helps. Okay. So any other questions, comments?
Thank you for your talk. Being adults, I think we can take in, I shouldn't say more or better, more easily to take your words and practice in our everyday lives. How we teach our kids about what you just have done as a speech on or talk on? What's the best way?
I'm not a parent, so I have no idea teaching kids, but I've been working with a lot of young people. You have to have a trust, though. I mean, you can teach kids values, correct, so that they know how to, I guess, work in this kind of very challenging world. But what I found with my own experience with my parents, right, and is that I would sometimes tell my parents, okay, thank you for teaching those, and I said, like, the key thing is, like, don't tell me how to, like, oh, this is how you're going to work in society, this is how you're going to succeed in society, this is how you're going to deal with difficult people. But I told my mom, I said, the biggest gift you have given us is not about those. And she never really taught us about those, right? This people-to-people relationship, how to succeed in life. I told my mom, I said, the biggest gift you've ever given me is this heart, right? The courage to face all the challenges in my life with curiosity, right? It's not a, oh God, it's a problem again, right? No, it's curiosity. Oh, what is this? Right? What's the next right answer? And what's the next right answer? And what's the next right answer? So I would forge forward courageously without fearing about how people are going to look at me, or, you know, maybe it's a long way to get around this obstacle, but, you know, I feel this a lot more than other people. So, but don't think that young people don't know, and don't kind of like try to teach them things that maybe is something you're in the environment that you grew up in, because the world they're growing up in is very, very different. Really. I mean, if you look at when you know, my parents were growing up versus, I'm dating myself here, okay? So like the time when my parents were growing up versus like right now with what kids are growing up, like even for my parents, when they were young people's age right now, maybe in their 20s or their 30s, they were able to find employment. They were actually able to save money to buy houses and everything. But if you look at young people nowadays, they graduate with huge student loans maybe, right? And it's very hard to afford a house because it's so expensive, right? And when they graduate, they may not get a job. So their savings account is not the same, right? What they could save, because it's what they have and what they're enjoying is also very different from, you know, your age too, because young people nowadays, they've got access to everything, right? You turn on the tap, there's water, right? And if you turn on the range, there's fire. They could cook. You go to the supermarket, you can get food, and now it's more convenient. Everything is like with a phone, right? You don't even need to call. You just like touch. You get everything delivered to you, right? That, you know, you can stay at home. You don't have to go out and you can still live the world the way, kind of like the way you did, right? But then the world that you grew up in is again very, very different. So sometimes give that flexibility. But teach young people actually what's more important is the core, the heart space, for them to have the strength to deal with whatever that they're going to deal with. I think that is more important. Instead of asking them to be successful, is to build a foundation for them to naturally succeed in whatever way and whatever that they do. And what I found too with young people, and I would say kind of like the millennials and later, is in Buddhism we believe in reincarnation, right? And I say that young people nowadays are going to be very different even from my age, right? So these millennials and younger, what they're doing is they chose to be born during this period of human history to bring change. They're game changers. That's why there's a lot of creativity. That's why there's a lot of very natural kind of instinctive questioning of the current system, challenging the current system, because there's a drive inside of them to bring change. They chose to come during a tumultuous period of human history to bring change. Trust me, I've taught young people around the world, and I found that they get the stuff that I was teaching more than my peers would have gotten. Right? During my time growing up, that is probably like in the 90s, it was all about globalization, right? It was all about consumerism, it was all about buying stuff, right? And more is more, not enough too. But young people nowadays are different. They think very differently. So believe in them, though. They are game changers. They're here to bring change. I really believe that. You just need to empower them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone on this side?
Okay, so young people changing the game. A young person had brought to me this kind of interesting perspective. If I can share it in a respectful way. Inside the center here we have Dongdan and Shidan. A younger person, maybe a Western person, might say, what's the point of having Dongdan? It's like, why do I need to identify with Dongdan and Shidan, right? These things in Western culture can be very fluid, but maybe there's a, and when they see this, like if you're new to Buddhism and you see this, you might think, well, these people are very married to tradition. Like they're afraid if you don't have Dongdan and Shidan, you're not being Chinese, maybe. I don't know. Do you think, yeah, there's a space for this kind of transformation to become these maybe more traditional practices or views?
Well, this is actually just how they organize space, right? Just like in certain religious traditions too, they have a way of organizing the congregation within a great grand hall, right? So we have this, I think maybe Chang Ji you might need to help me because I'm the traveling nun. I actually spend I spend more time traveling than I'm actually in a monastery. I'm so sorry. Why am I apologizing? Right? But I think it is a way of organizing space, right? And is there Dongdan Shidan is also a gender thing where the male on one side and female on one side. It's just this gender segregation is because there are also other traditions, I think maybe even in Christianity where maybe not now, I'm not sure, but maybe earlier, they also have the segregation of male and female. But again, you know, this is a tradition, right, that we continue to honor this tradition because it gives a sense of formality to the practice that we're engaging in, right? It's just like when you're going to say, oh, why is everyone driving on the left side, right? Or you could drive on the right. Why can't we drive on the right side? Because this is like, you know, it gives organization, but it did not occur out of the blue. Right? It also evolved, and I'm sure maybe in the future it might evolve into something else because space might be different. So it's just over time. It's tradition, but it evolves too. It just did not come up like that all of a sudden. Yeah? Or you want to add more? I think you might say more.
I think one more thing is that because Dharma Mountain, we are trying to standardize what we have here and what we have, in fact, in other centers in the world. So that whenever you walk into a center in Dharma Mountain, then you know, as one to say, how we organize the space, you know, where you can, you can comfortably match into the environment. So that's why we are following the tradition throughout all the centers in the world. So I think even though here maybe there is, I think in Asia people will tend to be more comfortable if they are with the same gender. So here maybe you are comfortable to make surround, but to follow the traditions in the whole organizations. I think you'll be following that.
It also applies to other faith traditions too, of how they organize their space. And so for perhaps like for Christians, when they go into church, they naturally kind of also know where they're supposed to go, and I guess the rituals or the rites that they need to do before they enter the church, or maybe a synagogue. So it's kind of very similar here too. Now, of course, for a person who's not familiar with the tradition, or for young people who are not familiar with the tradition, when they come in, they have all these questions about why are we doing it this way, right? So just look at it as an organization of space. It's an identity, and people naturally know what they're supposed to do. Right? Now, will it evolve? I'm pretty sure it will. Right? I'm sure it will. But then how we're doing it here is really like what Chang Ji said. It's the Dharma Mountains standard style. Yeah. And now in the future, like would they go males on one side, females on one side? I'm pretty sure it might change. I'm no guarantee though. If not, I'll get ostracized by my community. Right, but I'm pretty sure though it might change because with the evolving society, right? Does it have to be males on one side or females on one side? And I remember too, years ago when Shufu were still alive and we were conducting the Chan is what you call Chan is what? The Great Dharma, the Great Compassion Dharma. The Great Compassion Dharani Repentance Ceremony, right? And they did it over actually Columbia University, right? So they got a great hall, they were doing it, and we had actually some Americans that had a huge reaction to it. It's because they go like, why does monks have to go in front of nuns? Right? And then why do you have men on one side and women on the other side? And why is men in front and women in the back? Right, so it's a cultural thing now. It's cultural that what we're doing is traditional, right? And during that time, we do still have patriarchy, right? So it naturally happens this way. But in America, they're more about equality. So they have this reaction, but it's okay. It's okay. It's a ceremonial thing, right? But it doesn't mean that because I actually how do we say that? I'm a resident nun in our retreat center, Dharma Retreat Center. So I'm the only nun. And the others are, there are 4 monks there. But the nice thing is, the younger monks, right, they actually open the door for me. Yeah, they let me go through first. There you go. Right? So it changes. Any other questions? If not, maybe we'll end. Right. Moderator, master, MC.
If there are no other questions, then please place your palms together and thank Sue for her wise words today. Thank you so much. Up here.